You're about to hear the message, What Does It Take to Be in the Lineup? From the series, The King and I. Matthew tells us about the King of the Universe by Phil Brainerd. We hope you enjoy it. My first position in full-time ministry was in a church in a little place called Southgate, Michigan. That's a little bit south of Detroit. My official title was Assistant Pastor of Youth and Music. My less official title was Assistant Pastor of Youth and Music and whatever the senior pastor didn't feel like doing. So part of my official job description was Youth Pastor. Youth pastors do a lot of things. One of those things is to arrange for various outings for the young people in the church. One of the regular events was a visit to the local stadium to watch baseball games. Let's go back there. The year was 1989. The baseball team was, and still is, the Detroit Tigers. Taking young people to a ball game can be a challenge. When you travel in from the suburbs, you have to get everyone into vehicles and deal with traffic and parking. Now, the biggest problem is the expense. Good seats at modern ballparks are on the expensive side. To compare to today's numbers, if you go to the Yankees website today and look up seat prices, you'll find that a seat along the first baseline costs almost $100. Obviously, you're not going to take a youth group to a game at those prices. As you move further away, the prices come down. Midway up the stadium, the prices come down to a mere $60. That's still a bit steep for kids who, if they have a job, they're working at McDonald's for a minimum wage. But if you go all the way to the top, the prices get more affordable. At the top level of the stadium edge, the prices come in at about $10 a seat. Now that's doable. These seats have loving names. Some call them the nosebleed seats. Others call them the peanut gallery. Whatever you call them, we got tickets up there. So we piled a group of kids onto a bus, took them to downtown Detroit, and walked up lots and lots and lots of steps until we reached our seats. So now it's time for the game to start. Every baseball stadium has an announcer. In those days, the announcer of the Detroit Stadium had an unusual style. He would give a word of welcome and then announce the opening lineup, the players for the first inning. The announcer would say the position and then the name. He would then pause and repeat the name. So it sounded something like this. On first base, Alan Trammell. Trammell. On second base, Lou Whitaker. Whitaker. The announcer would do this all the way through the lineup. Now, the folks who sit up in the cheap seats, the peanut gallery, had a number of interesting traditions. One was to have some fun during the opening announcements. During the pause that I just mentioned, they would all yell out, "Who?" After the name was repeated, they would say, "Oh." So it sounded something like this. On first base, Alan Trammell. Who? Trammell. Oh. On second base, Lou Whitaker. Who? Whitaker. Oh. This went on all the way through the lineup. Now, at one of these events, I got into a discussion with the kids around me. We asked the question, what would it take to be in that lineup? Lots of young people dream about that. Well, to be in that lineup, you would have to be one of the best ball players in the country at any given time. You would have to be strong and fast, agile and smart. In fact, you would have to be the strongest, the fastest, the most agile, and the smartest. We've just started a new series, The King and I. Matthew tells us about the King of the Universe. In this series, we're going to work our way through the Gospel according to Matthew. So last week, we heard an introduction to the book. Today, we're going to start at the beginning in chapter 1. Matthew starts his book with the genealogy of the great king. A genealogy is a list of someone's ancestors. In this case, these are the people who were ancestors of Jesus Christ. If you will, you could call this a kind of lineup. As we read this, We're going to ask the same question that the kids in my youth group asked years ago. What would it take to be in the lineup? In other words, what did these people have that qualified them to be on this list? Let's dive in by opening our Bibles and reading Matthew chapter 1. Before we start, let me warn you that we're going to read a long list of names. Long lists can be tedious to listen to. Nevertheless, this list is important, so please bear with me. Let's start reading in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. A quick note, so far we've seen all the people from what are called the patriarchs up to the first kings of ancient Israel. Let's read now a list of the kings. We just started with Solomon, so let's read on in verse 7. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam, the father of Abijah, Abijah, the father of Asa, Asa, the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat, the father of Jehoram, Jehoram, the father of Uzziah, Uzziah, the father of Jotham, Jotham, the father of Ahaz, Ahaz, the father of Hezekiah, Hezekiah, the father of Manasseh, Manasseh, the father of Ammon, Ammon, the father of Josiah, and Josiah, the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. Now, at the close of this period, Israel had fallen into sin, and so God brought a great judgment. He allowed the nation of Babylon to invade and conquer, and so the people of what was then called Judah were then taken into exile. After the exile, Matthew begins this list afresh. These are individuals who have the lineage of a great king, but at that time Israel did not have a monarchy. So let's read those names. Verse 12. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel the father of Abihud, Abihud the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azor, Azor the father of Zadok, Zadok the father of Achim, Achim the father of Elihud, Elihud the father of Eleazar, Eleazar the father of Mathan, Mathan the father of Jacob, now, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Now, before we get to our main question, what does it take to be in the lineup? We have to answer the question, why is the lineup here? In other words, why did Matthew start his book with a genealogy? The first answer to this question involves what we today call the target audience of this book. The target audience is the Jewish people. Recall that last time we spoke, we looked at an introduction to Matthew's book, and we learned that Matthew wanted all of his friends to meet Jesus. Well, his most immediate friends were the Jewish people. The Jewish people in the days of Matthew were a very diverse group of people, just as Jewish people are today. They disagreed about a lot, but there was one thing they agreed upon. One day, a great king would come to rule their nation. He was called the Messiah, the chosen one. This topic came up a number of times over our discussions of the Advent season, so we won't spend a lot of time here. But one of the reasons Matthew presented this genealogy was to demonstrate that Jesus was eligible to be this great king. To qualify to be the great king, at least three things needed to be true. First, the Messiah had to be Jewish. He had to be a descendant of Abraham. Second, he must be not just Jewish, but a descendant of King David. Matthew points these things out first thing on his list. When you look at verse 1 of Matthew, it says, "This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." So in this genealogy, in this list, Matthew includes Abraham and David, and the connections in between. Because Jesus is descended from both Abraham and David, Jesus is qualified to be the great king. This would satisfy the Jewish believers that Matthew was trying to reach. There is a second reason Matthew included this genealogy. He wanted to demonstrate God's power and God's faithfulness to his promises. Matthew did this by showing that Jesus fulfilled prophecy. Again, we spoke about this during Advent, but let's just be reminded of one example. In the book of Genesis, chapter 49, reading in verse 10, we see these words, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his." This prophecy says that all the kings of Israel must be descended from Judah. And this will be true until the final great king comes. Judah was one of the 12 sons of Jacob, whose name was later changed to Israel. And he was the grandson of Abraham. So in this genealogy, Matthew includes Judah. Looking at verse 2, we read, Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, and as we mentioned, Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. This shows that Jesus fulfilled prophecy. In order to make prophecy work, you need a couple of things. First, you need power. A lot of things can come up between the time that you predict something and the time that it's supposed to happen. God controls all the events from the time that he makes a prophecy until the time that he fulfills it, because he has the power to do so. Incredible power. Secondly, you must be faithful. If God makes a promise, he feels personally obligated to expend the energy and the resources to make the promise happen. Let's look at some life examples. Lots of times, people have to apologize because they can't keep a promise. Have you ever had someone tell you that they'll meet you at a certain time and they're late? Or they forgot? Or something came up that they had no control over? Sure you have. It happens to all of us because we're all people. Or maybe someone told you that they would meet you, but they overslept. Sometimes if you're in bed, staying in bed feels much more important than making an appointment happen. To fulfill a promise, you have to want to fulfill the promise. Your promises must have high priority to you. You must be faithful. When God makes a prediction, he has the power to fulfill the prediction. When God makes a promise, he is faithful. So Matthew wanted his friends to know that God is powerful and that God is faithful. And he demonstrated both of these things through Jesus in that Jesus fulfilled prophecy. This is something we're going to see all throughout the book of Matthew. Matthew points out lots of times that Jesus fulfilled prophecy. We'll highlight those as we go along. Now, there's a third reason that Matthew included this genealogy. This reason is not specifically stated in the text, but I think it's true based on my experience studying the Scriptures. I believe that Matthew included this genealogy to demonstrate that people are important to God. People are important. Their names are important. Their lives are important. Their stories are important. Do you know what that means? It means you are important to God. Your name is important to him. He knew your name before he put the first few molecules of the universe into place. Your life is important to him. Your story is important to him. The Bible is a collection of stories about real people. In many cases, the names of those people are a prominent part of the stories that the Bible tells. So, Matthew starts his book with a genealogy. He does it first because of his target audience, the Jewish people, who are looking for their Messiah. Second, to demonstrate God's power and faithfulness through fulfilled prophecy. Finally, because people are important to God. So, now that we know why Matthew included this list of names at the beginning of his book, let's get back to our question. What does it take to be in the lineup? Or more specifically, who were these people, and what qualified them to be on this list? Let's answer that question by looking at just a few of the names, some of the people on this list. Sadly, we don't have time to meet them all, but let's look at a few important ones. We're going to learn that each of them did something special, or they had a special quality that allowed them to be here. We're also going to learn something very important, something surprising. We're going to learn that they all lacked qualities that you might otherwise expect. So let's look at some of these very special people. The first name we'll look at is Abraham. We first meet Abraham in the book of Genesis in chapter 12. Abraham at the time was living in the ancient city of Haran. We think this is located in modern-day Turkey. One day, God appeared to Abraham. Here's how the conversation went. I'm reading in Genesis chapter 12, starting in verse 1. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him. So, why is Abraham on this list? First, God picked him. For reasons we do not know, God picked Abraham to be the father of the whole Jewish race. Second, Abraham trusted God, and he obeyed God. Abraham was a successful person living in a safe, comfortable place. God told Abraham that if he was willing to leave the safety and comfort of his home and go where God told him to go, that Abraham would receive all kinds of incredible things, wonderful promises. We're told that Abraham believed God, so he obeyed when God told him to go. Now, so far, we can see why Abraham is on the list. He had faith, at times great faith. But there's also something surprising about Abraham. Let's read about it. If you pick up just a few verses later in Genesis 12, you find, starting in verse 10, these words. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while, because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is my wife.' Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you." Abraham had a surprising problem. He didn't always trust God to protect him and to provide for him. He went to the land that God told him to go to, but then there was a famine, a challenge. Did Abraham pray to God and ask God to provide? No. Instead of trusting God, he ran down to Egypt. While in Egypt, he got scared. Does he ask God to protect him and trust that God will do that? Again, no. He told a big, whopping lie, and this got him into all kinds of trouble. So this tells us something. Perfection is not required to be in the lineup. That's true of others on the list, too. Some of them do things much worse than Abraham. And so people who want to follow God can take great comfort in knowing that it doesn't require perfection to be in the lineup. There's a lot more to learn about Abraham. We'll run into him a lot as we study the scriptures together. Let's look at another name, the name Ruth. In Matthew 1 verse 5 we read about her. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Let me summarize a few things about this woman. The book of Ruth in the Old Testament starts with the story of a family who lived in ancient Israel, a father, a mother, and 2 sons. During the time that they lived, there was a famine, not unlike the one that happened when Abraham was alive. Like Abraham, the family traveled to a neighboring nation to find food. Whereas Abraham traveled to Egypt, this family went the other way, to Moab. While there, the sons married local women. Now, in ancient Israel, most Jewish young men tried to marry Jewish women. Young people could marry someone from another nation, but you had to do so carefully. Jewish believers at that time had one prime directive of their life, to encourage and protect belief in the one true God. People from other nations had a way of being dedicated to other gods. Well, things in Moab didn't work out very well. The father died. Then the 2 sons died. So the mother is left living in a foreign nation with 2 daughters-in-law in poverty. The mother, whose name was Naomi, heard one day that things got better back home. So she tells her daughters-in-law that she's leaving, and that it's okay for them to stay and start their lives afresh in their homeland. One of the young women takes Naomi's advice and leaves. But the other, whose name was Ruth, does something highly unusual. Let's read about it. In Ruth chapter 1 verse 16, here's what we see. But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Something amazing has happened. Ruth, who grew up in a land filled with idols, steeped in idolatry, has come to love the one true God. She loves her mother-in-law, and she loves her Jewish family. She is willing to leave everything to go to the land of Israel with Naomi. So Ruth has some qualities that would place her on a list of memorable people in the Bible. But she also lacks something that you might expect. She lacks what I'll call pedigree. Here's what I mean. You would think that the Jewish Messiah would have all Jewish ancestors. For Jesus to qualify for the throne of Israel, it turns out he only needed to trace his lineage from Abraham to David. You could do this through the fathers. Ruth was one of 2 foreign women who were ancestors of Jesus. By reminding us that God included Ruth in the genealogy of Jesus, Matthew makes an important point, and here it is. Pedigree is not required to be in the lineup. And this sets a tone for things that we'll learn about later in the book. For example, in Matthew chapter 8, Matthew quotes Jesus as saying this, "I say to you that many will come from the east and the west, and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven." So, what does it take to be in the lineup? So far, we've learned that perfection is not required to be in the lineup. Pedigree is not required either. Now, I wish we had time to look at all the names. We need someday to look at the lives of people like Isaac and Jacob and Judah. We need to learn about all the kings in the line of Jesus, David, Solomon, Jehoshaphat, and Josiah, and others. For now, time only permits us to hit one more name. That is the name of King Ahaz. King Ahaz. Let's read about him in 2 Chronicles chapter 28, starting in verse 1. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He followed the ways of the kings of Israel and also made idols for worshipping the Baals. He burned sacrifices in the valley of Ben-Hinnom and sacrificed his children in the fire, engaging in the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places, on the hilltops, and under every spreading tree. Now, this is odd. Ahaz didn't follow the one true God. He followed idols. He did terrible things, detestable things. He was weak, unfaithful, cocky, misguided, and simply downright evil. To summarize this man, there is not a single good thing we can say about Ahaz. You know how I said earlier that each person on the list had something good or special about them that qualified them to be on the list? Well, I was wrong. As I said, there is not a single good thing we can say about this man. So, what's he doing on the list? Ahaz had only one accomplishment in life. He was a king of Israel who lived long enough to have a child who could carry on the family lineage. Perhaps Matthew included Ahaz to start yet another theme for his book. Recall that Matthew wants all of his friends to meet Jesus. Well, the story of Jesus is complex. The Bible is a complex book. God, who is described in the Bible, is complex. He is complex, and he is very different from us. He does things very differently than we might do. He has altogether different goals than we do. We started with the illustration of a baseball team. I mentioned the conversation that I had with the kids in my youth group. We wondered what it would take to be in the lineup of a major baseball team. Well, as we said earlier, you would have to be the best. You would have to be the strongest, the fastest, the most talented. So when you watch a major league ball game, you see the results of that. You see the best. You see the players who are successful, at least on some level. But you see, the kingdom of heaven is very different. Of course, some of the people are what you'd expect. We will read in Matthew's book about people who met Jesus and followed him right away. Those are great stories. But we also read about people like Judas. Judas had every opportunity to know who Jesus was. He spent years following Jesus around. He saw miracles, miracles that you and I could only pray for. And yet, Judas betrayed Jesus. Why is this? Well, imagine watching a major league ball game. One player is what you'd expect, a successful athlete who hits a home run. The next player, though, is clearly out of shape. He has a big beer belly. And this is strange because he has access to the best trainers, the best equipment, the best dietitians, the best of everything available. But he doesn't take advantage of anything that he is offered. And because of this, he strikes out. Now, someone runs over to the coach and asks, what is that guy doing in the lineup? What's he even doing on the field? Imagine that the coach answers in this way. The owner wants to give him a chance. And he's the owner. He can do whatever he wants. You see, God is God, and he is complex. He can do whatever he wants. Sometimes he makes a genuine offer of his love to people who never respond. And so we get a man in the genealogy named Ahaz, a man who has missed every chance he's ever been given. Later, we will meet people like Judas, and we'll meet the high priests, and we'll meet Pontius Pilate, people who were offered the love of God, but who refused. Let's pull all of this together. Matthew starts his book with a genealogy, a list of all the descendants of Jesus. Matthew wanted all of his friends to meet Jesus, and his immediate friends were Jewish. He wanted them to know that Jesus had all the qualifications to be the King of Israel, the Messiah. We'll later learn that Jesus has qualities to make him king of a much greater realm. He is king of the universe. By starting with the genealogy, Matthew shows us that God has great power and great faithfulness to his promises. Jesus fulfilled prophecies concerning the Messiah. Matthew will show us more as we study his book. By starting with the genealogy, Matthew tells us that people are important to God. Now we ask the question, what does it take to be in the lineup? We met Abraham, a man who was far from perfect, so perfection is not required. But when given the opportunity, Abraham made God his king. We met Ruth, a woman who loved the God of Israel, but who had no pedigree. So pedigree is not required. People from all over the world are welcome. But Ruth, even though she had no pedigree, made God her king. To push the baseball illustration, it seems that what it takes to be in the lineup is a willingness to join the team, to step up to the plate, and swing. But then we met a man named Ahaz. He refused to make God his king. So as we study the book of Matthew, the question comes to us. Matthew tells us about the King of the universe who offers us his love. Will you accept that love and allow Jesus to be your king? You just heard the message, What Does It Take to Be in the Lineup? By Phil Brainerd. Thank you for listening. May the Lord richly bless you.